Good evening, friends. I welcome all of you for the 7th Durga Bhagwat Endowment Lecture. Today's speaker, distinguished historian Ramachandra Guha. I request him to take his seat, please. And today, Chairperson Dr. Usha Thakkar. Now, before we begin our session, I would like to just request all these channel people that Mr. Guha has requested. If they are willing to shoot, they may, but he won't be able to talk to them after the lecture. Secondly, let me just request you to keep your mobiles on silent mode or switched off. We have made a separate arrangement outside this Darbar hall, so there also no need to stand here. You may go and sit comfortably and listen to the lecture. Durgabai Bhagwat, as you know, was among India's foremost scholars, researchers and writers. Her notable work in folklore, Buddhist literature and anthropology was highly recognized. Her lyrical prose and impressionistic style of writing have remained with us readers, as does her incredible body of work. We also remember her straightforwardness, endless curiosity, constant search for knowledge, and her interest in all walks of life, even when she was 90 years old. Durgabai had a multifaceted personality. She was a Gandhian activist in her college days and remained so in its true sense till her last. Her love of freedom was seen in 1975 during the emergency, when she wrote and spoke fearlessly against the establishment, prevailing systems and the government. As a matter of policy and on principle, she had refused to accept any honors or awards offered by the government after the emergency. She was unafraid to express her opinions, however unpopular they were. Her value-based, independent, transparently honest personality was the role model for many. She was, I can say, an intellectual scholar, spokesperson of the common people. The speciality of this endowment is, this was established through public donations in 2011 in her memory. Under this endowment, an annual lecture is held on a topic drawn from fields that Durgabai had engaged with, that is anthropology, folk art, religious traditions, culture in general, and literature. Now for this, today we have a very distinguished historian, as I said, Dr. Ramachandra Guha. He is a historian and biographer based in Bangalore. He has taught at the universities of Yale and Stanford, held the Arnenes Chair at the University of Oslo, and been the Indo-American Community Visiting Professor at the University of California at Berkeley. In the academic year 2011-12, he served as the Philip Roman Professor of History and International Affairs at the London School of Economics. His books, you may be aware, we also have 20 in number in our holdings. His books include a pioneering environmental history, The Unquiet Woods, and an award-winning social history of cricket, A Corner of a Foreign Field. India After Gandhi was chosen as a book of the year by The Economist, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, The San Francisco Chronicle, Time Out and Outlook, and as a book of the decade in the Times of India, the Times of London and The Hindu. His most recent book is Gandhi Before India, which was chosen as a notable book of the year by the New York Times. Naturally, he had so many awards and honors to his credit. His books are translated in 20 languages all over, and his syndicated column is appearing in 11 languages in newspapers with a combined readership of some 20 million. I would like to say here, his recent book, Makers of Modern India, is translated in Marathi and which is on sale outside Darbar Hall. Its price is 800, which will be today, special discount is given and you may avail it for 500. His awards include, I will just mention one or two, the Leopold Hedy Prize of the American Society of Environmental History, the Daily Telegraph Cricket Society Prize, the Malcolm Award for Excellence in Social Science Research, and the Ramnath Goenka Prize for Excellence in Journalism, the Sahitya Akademi Award, and the R.K. Narayan Prize as well. On the top of that, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan, and in 2014, he was awarded an honorary doctorate in the humanities by Yale University. Now today's session will be chaired by Dr. Usha Thakkar. For Asiatic Society's members or people in Mumbai are well known about her qualities and about her scholarship. But still I feel that let me just in brief tell few things about her. That at present she is the President Mani Bhavan Gandhi Sangrahalaya Mumbai. She retired as professor and head department of political science SNDT Women's University, and she has done postdoctoral research at the University of Chicago on Fulbright Fellowship, Cornell University on Senior Fulbright Fellowship, and at York University on WIT Fellowship from the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute. She was also visiting fellow at Sheffield City Polytechnic, UK. We have separate association with her as she was the vice president of our society and now also of Banasali Vidyapit. But her research areas are common. As Dr. Guha and Dr. Thakkar, her research areas are Gandhian studies, women's studies, and Indian politics. She has presented papers at many national and international conferences, and recently, Understanding Gandhi and Mumbai are her books published just last month or last week as well. So I welcome both of them. Dr. Guha will be speaking on the craft of historical biography. Before I would hand over the mic to him, I would request our President, Mr. Kale, to present him a small memento. Instead of a bouquet, I would like to present him a book with a back. Now may I request Dr. Guha to... Yeah. So handing over mic to the chairperson.
Dr. Ramachandra Guha, Mr. Kale, the President of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, Professor Vispi Balagoria, Secretary, Dr. Meena Vaishampayan, the Chairperson, Endowment Lecture Committee, the trustees and members of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai and friends. We all know today that we in India do not have a developed area of historical biography, though there have been commissioned biographies and hagiographies also. since good old days. And we do not talk, or I think sometimes we do not even like to think about our heroes like ordinary human beings with their limitations and failures. Because the trait of hero worshipping puts them in the respected category of supermen or superwomen, and critical or analytical insights fail to develop, and much is left untold. And very often, as we know, the public discourse overlooks the presence of various shades of grey between white and black. So the historical biographer is concerned with the craft of making one seamless story. But there is no monotony of a single color. Rather, there are various shades of experiences of life that make the story exciting and interesting. So the craft is not putting various fragments of the collected data in one place and constructing a single discourse about the past or the individual, but to allow multiple secondary discourses to surface that will enhance the effectiveness of the main story of the past or the individual. So now for the historian and biographer, understanding of the individual comes from understanding his or her contextual determinants and vice versa. So ultimately, the historical biographer faces dual challenge: telling history and telling life, and they are interconnected. And it's just like history and literature. So we are delighted to have Dr. Ramachandra Guha with us this evening, a distinguished scholar and a spellbinding orator. He has written and is writing exemplary historical biographies. He is a master craftsman of historical biographies, and we are very happy today to have him, and we very much look forward to you, Dr. Guha. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Usha Ben and Meena Tai, for your introductions. It's wonderful to be here in my favorite city. I came in late last night, and I'm staying courtesy the Asiatic in a very nice, charming hotel in Ballard Estate. And I've stayed in many places in this part of town, but never there. So I was enchanted and walked around. And I tweeted a picture of the street, and I said, lovely to be back in my favorite city, staying in this charming hotel. Whereupon, one of my many critics in my hometown, I have critics in many towns, including my hometown, added to my tweet, we Kannadigas don't want you, you remain in Mumbai. All right, which I might actually. That's how much I love this city. And so I'm really happy to be here and speaking in memory of a great writer, thinker, patriot, and democrat, whom I first encountered many years ago while I was writing a biography of Maria Elvin. And Durga Bhagwat was doing fieldwork among the Gonds at the same time as Elvin was living among the Gonds. And they had some disagreements, which is common among two brilliant, articulate, and courageous people. So I am here today to speak on the craft of historical biography. And let me begin with two caveats. The first is, I shall speak mostly of biography as it relates to people of some public significance, hence historical biography. The writing of lives of people who had a larger public profile, not necessarily only in politics. It could be in sport, it could be in literature, it could be in activism. But there is also a very interesting and emerging field of biographical studies of little known people whose lives can also be quite fascinating. For example, a life of a gangster, or just the life of an ordinary hotel earner, the humdrum quotidian life of just a working professional can also be an important literary exercise. But I'm going to speak of biography as it relates to figures of public or political importance. And secondly, the second caveat is that I'm a historian of the modern world, let's say from the mid-19th century onwards. So what I say today in my talk may be relevant to those who wish to write or read biographies of modern figures, like for example Durga Bhagwat, but not so relevant to figures from the distant past, such as Ashoka or Akbar or Shivaji or Chandragupta Maurya or Malik Ambar and so on, because I'm a historian of the modern period. That's where my interest and such expertise as I have lies. The first thing I want to say has already been said by Usha Ben Thakkar, namely that historical biography is an underdeveloped field in India. Now, biography lies at the juncture of literature and history. And the great novelists and literary figures whom India has produced, of whom Durga Bhagwat was one, but there are many others in all our languages. There are also some very fine historians. India has an extremely well-developed tradition of historical studies. Indian historians from the days of D.D. Koswami right on till today have had not just national but global influence. So you would expect that in an intellectual culture that breeds good historians and also breeds good novelists and literary writers, biography would be developed, because biography is at the intersection of history and literature. But that's not true. Such biographies that exist, and again a point Usha Ben has mentioned, are mostly hagiographies. There are some decent studies of our modern political figures. So you could read B.R. Nanda on Gokhale and be instructed. You could read Rajmohan Gandhi on Patel and be instructed. You could read Sarvapalli Gopal on Nehru and be instructed. So when it comes to the makers of modern India, the big chaps, not necessarily the big women. I mean, I would love to read a good biography of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, but it doesn't exist. But at least the most important political figures in 20th century India, Gandhi, Ambedkar, Rajaji, Patel, Subhash Bose, have had Gokhale, Tilak, have had competent biographical studies written about them. Studies that are well researched, that use original materials, that string together a narrative. But even these books are essentially about the public figure. If you were to read Dhananjay Keer or Ambedkar, you would know nothing about his two marriages or about his romances. If you were to read Nehru on Sarvapalli Gopal on Nehru, Edwina Mountbatten appears once, and that in a footnote in the 3 volumes. So even the good books that exist are limited in that they don't probe adequately the personal life of public figures. So why are there so few good biographies written in India? And I can think of at least 7 reasons why we lack a rich, robust and deep biographical tradition in our country. The first reason is the burden of our religious inheritance, namely Hinduism. Because Hinduism does not value the finite lived life from birth to grave. Because once you die, you've been reborn as someone else. Unlike Christianity or Islam, where you actually have lives of saints, hagiographical lives of saints. So that's the first reason. The burden of a dominant religion, which seems to undervalue the finite lived life from cradle to grave. Secondly, the burden of what was till recently the most dominant intellectual tradition in our universities, Marxism, because Marxism also undervalues individual life and personality, since it is class and classes and states that determine human history. Third, a more general tilt of history towards social science, that historians, well, history began as a discipline, not in the ancient period, but in the modern period, with such figures as the Englishman Gibbon or the Frenchman Michelet. It was allied to literature. You evoked a mood, a sentiment, a scenario, a context. And then from the 19th century onwards, history became a branch of social science. You talked about technology, structure, state, process. And in that, somehow, biography got lost. A fourth reason why we Indians don't write many good biographies is our indifference to record keeping. We don't keep, even those of us who are fortunate to have very distinguished or remarkable forebears, don't keep papers. I don't know whether Durga Bhagwat kept very many papers, probably not. And those that are kept, dust, fungus and the monsoon takes care of. So that's reason number 4, we are not good at keeping records. Reason number 5, inhibiting a biographical tradition, is the fear of giving offense. If you see, and I can say this speaking in Mumbai, if you see what happened to the American biographer of Shivaji for writing a scholarly work with one paragraph which everyone disputed, probably without having read that paragraph, right? And likewise with many other figures, many other important contentious figures, people stay away from critical scrutiny. They may write hagiographies of living people or dead people. The 6th reason why biography is underdeveloped in India is that it is the most challenging of literary forms. And I'll explain that in my talk. Why writing a social history, a cultural history, a feminist history, a Dalit history, these are all challenging. But from a purely literary craftsmanship point of view, writing a biography may be the most challenging literary form. So there are multiple reasons, some generic, some distinctive to India, why we don't have a robust biographical tradition in our country. So let me move now to a more personal question. How did I get interested in the art and craft of historical biography? And I'll say a little bit about that because I think that might explain the ways in which I approach the writing of a life. My whole life was changed in the summer of 1978, 40 years ago, by reading an anthropologist called Elwin. And it happened as follows. I was studying economics at the Delhi School of Economics, and I had a master's project to study the impact of an aeronautical factory in the Koraput district of Odisha on the Adivasi population. So it was an economics project, development in a backward area and the uplift of the tribals. And when I was at Koraput, somebody told me about Elwin. They just said that a white man came from very far away and studied the Adivasis. So when I went back to the university library, I picked up Elwin's book, Leaves from the Jungle, and was enchanted. I was already bored with economics, and economics was exasperated with me. At that stage, I'd been in university for 4 years, and I'd got 4 successive low second class marks. So it's not just that I was bored with economics was actually exasperated with me. So Elwin gave me a route out. I thought, look, this is fascinating. Sociology, anthropology, it's more akin to my temperament, my interests, my aptitudes. And even though I finally finished with another second class in my MA final, Elwin provided me an escape route. And I went on to Kolkata to do a PhD in sociology, which I finished, unlike Durga Bhagwat, who did not finish because she fell very ill while doing a PhD in sociology many years before me. So Elwin changed my life. He moved me from economics to sociology. And when I started my research for my PhD, it so happened that I chose as my topic a history of the Chipko movement, the popular peasant movement against commercial forestry in the Himalaya. And the more I read about forests, Elwin came back, because Elwin was almost the first Indian social scientist to write about the place of forests in the lives of Adivasis and peasants. what forest meant to them economically, in terms of what it provided for their livelihood, what it meant to them socially, culturally, as a source of symbols and myths and folk songs. So I got more and more interested in Elvin. Then I started working on Gandhi. I've been interested in Gandhi almost 30 years now. And then I encountered Elvin again, because Elvin had come to India as a missionary in Pune, met Gandhi, been inspired by him, and he left his mission job and started working among the Adivasis. So I got deeper and deeper into Elvin. But because I was an academic working in an Indian university, I was discouraged from writing a full-fledged biography by my colleagues, because biography was not something academics did. They didn't spend 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 years investigating the life of a single individual, certainly an individual who was not Mahatma Gandhi or B.R. Ambedkar or Vallabhbhai Patel. But the more I read, the more Elvin intrigued me. Now, in those days, I worked in the Institute of Economic Growth, which is part of Delhi University. And I had to give, every year, at the start of the academic year, I had to write an account of what I was working on. So I remember that in 1990, my research project was titled The Tribal Question in Modern India. So it was going to be a book on debates about Adivasis in the 20th century. But at the end of that 12-month period, my interest in Elvin developed. So in 1991, my project was titled Warrior Elvin and the Tribal Question in Modern India. So inching towards Elvin. And by 1992, it had become Warrior Elvin, an intellectual biography. So it had moved from the tribal question in modern India to Warrior Elvin, an intellectual biography. So why these hesitations and inhibitions? Well, because as a sociologically oriented historian, I was taught to underplay the importance of individuals in history. I was told that it was larger social forces that made and remade history, not individuals. Also, as a sociologically oriented scholar, I was nervous of exploring mentalities and emotions, ambiguities and insecurities. I was uncomfortable with, indeed, ill-equipped or totally incompetent to explore the personal side of human relationships. Nothing in my academic background had prepared me, which meant that even if as I was moving more and more towards Elvin, I stopped at Warrior Elvin, an intellectual biography, which means it's just his books and his ideas, and his life is left out. Now, as I've said, biography requires the historian to ally with literature, whereas historians are trained to ally with social science. What a novelist does with her characters, a biographer must strive to do with his subject, with one difference. So there is a similarity between the writing of a novel and the writing of a biography, in that you have to deal with human relationships, with emotions, with mentalities, with psychological issues, but you can't make things up. I can't invent dialogue. A biographer has been called an artist, but an artist under oath. So, as I was moving towards a greater interest in Elvin per se, and as I was unlearning what my sociological and academic tradition had taught me, I was fortunate to spend a year in Berlin, at an institute in Berlin, where I encountered a great British biographer called Nicholas Boyle. It's probably unknown to anyone in this room, which is fair enough. He is now an emeritus professor of German literature. He was then a serving professor of German literature at the University of Cambridge. And he was the major biographer of the great German polymath Goethe. He'd written 2 volumes of his Goethe biography and was working on his 3rd. And although I was then in my late 30s when I went to spend this year in Berlin, although I'd already published 3 or 4 books, So far as the writing of biography went, I was a novice. And I was fortunate to spend a year in the same institute as a master. And I'd taken to Berlin with me the second draft of my Elwin biography, which I had, I was courageous and reckless enough to show to Nicholas Boyle, but I was lucky I had the courage, because he marked up that manuscript in the way he would mark up an undergraduate tutorial, and showed me where I had got everything wrong. And I won't bore you with all that he told me I had got wrong, but in that year in Berlin, speaking with Nicholas Boyle, taking long walks with him, and discussing the craft of historical biography, I came to formulate what I call Boyle's 3 laws of biography. The first law, Boyle's first law of biography is the secondary characters in a life are as important as the primary character. I've told you that in Dhananjay Kade's book on Ambedkar, the wives don't appear. Nor do his adversaries, except for Gandhi, you won't find anything else about all the other interesting social reformers of the day. And Boyle taught me that the secondary characters are very important. Also, it's in the encounters with the secondary characters that the primary character emerges most fully. If you want to know Elwin, or Durga Bhagwat, or the Sitares Ravi Shankar, or J.R.D. Tata, you would know them best through their relationships with their friends, their enemies, their lovers, their spouses, their children, their partners. That's how a biography, it's like a novel. You can't only the most recklessly experimental novel is about one person. And even if it's in the author's voice, it's about the people the author meets and interacts with, and engages with, and argues with, and loves, and disputes. And this is a law that Nicholas Boyle taught me, which is ruthlessly, ignored by most Indian biographers. They write it from the point of view of their subject. You write some of the best books, So you write a book on Nehru, in which you talk a little bit about Gandhi, because Gandhi was his mentor. You talk a little bit about Patel, because he worked with Patel. But there will be nothing about Edwina, nothing about his wife, nothing about rivals. So, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee or J.B. Kriplani, who fell out with Nehru, won't really figure. So, this is really the first law. The secondary characters must emerge as alive and human and interesting and engaging in their own right, because that's how you eliminate the primary character. Boyle's second law follows from the first law, and it goes as follows. Look for sources other than those emanating from the primary character. Again, this is a law which many Indian biographers neglect. So if you write on Patel, you essentially look at his writings. And this is a trap, particularly when dealing with someone like Elwin. So Elwin wrote 40 books, 500 newspaper articles, thousands of letters. So you could construct a whole book in Elwin's voice. Likewise with Gandhi. I'm now writing a 2-volume biography of Gandhi. And because there are 90 volumes of Gandhi's collected works around, actually 97, because there were 7 supplementary volumes as well, many biographers of Gandhi just write the whole book through Gandhi's voice. But it's very important to go, especially if your subject left a massive paper trail, not just Indian. Take Churchill. Or Nicholas Boyle was working on Goethe, and there are 120 volumes of Goethe's writings, not just 90. So it's very tempting just to look at that. But you have to look at other perspectives. What people were writing to Goethe, what they were writing around Goethe, about Goethe, what are the sources, in the government archive, in the law courts, in the newspapers, in cartoons. So it's very, very important, that's the second law, to look for sources other than those emanating from the primary character. And Boyle's third law is the crispest, and these are my, Nicholas Boyle himself, being a very scrupulous, reticent, old-fashioned British scholar, was not happy when I converted his ideas into 3 laws, right? three jokey laws. But the third law is two words: never anticipate. And I'll explain that. Never anticipate. It's a law a novelist knows very well, but sociologists don't. Sociologists set out their argument. And so when I was working on Elvin, to give you an illustration, Elvin met Gandhi, was totally absorbed with Gandhi, but later on fell out with him. So when you're talking about how he's credulous about Gandhi and writing this worshipful lyrical prose about the Mahatma, don't tell the reader that 10 years later he actually abuses or disparages Gandhi. Don't never anticipate. Like a novelist, like a playwright, let the drama emerge organically, seamlessly, quietly. So these are Boyle's three laws. Flesh out the secondary characters. Look for sources other than those emanating from your subject. Never anticipate. And to these three laws, I added a fourth law of my own, which goes as Guha's coda to a caveat to Boyle's three laws, which goes as follows. Do not be deterred even if your subject has written an apparently detailed and comprehensive autobiography. Do not be deterred. Verrier Elvin himself wrote a wonderful book, an autobiography called The Tribal World of Verrier Elvin, which was the first work of non-fiction to be awarded the Sahitya Academy Prize. The Sahitya Academy has an annual award in all Indian languages, and fortunately, since the RSS was running the government of India and when the Sahitya Academy was founded, English was one of those languages. And many great Indian novelists have won that award, Raja Rao, R.K. Narayan, Kamla Markandeya. But Elvin's book was the first work of non-fiction to win it, right? It's a beautiful book. It's a wonderfully lyrical book. And when I was working on my biography of Elvin, a lot of older people who had read Elvin asked me, what will I find in your book which is not in the autobiography? Because he's told everything. It's so beautifully written. It's apparently written in a confessional voice. He was a master of English prose. What will you find? Now, what I learned, and this is my fourth law, is that an autobiography is a preemptive strike against a future biographer. That's the best way to understand an autobiography. And it's the job of a biographer is not only to tell the story afresh, but in telling the story afresh, to make up for the evasions, the silences, and the misremembered memories of your subject's autobiography. Now, I'm now working on Gandhi. Gandhi's autobiography is much, much better known than Elvin's autobiography. But Gandhi, being an extraordinarily honest man, knew that what he was doing was imperfect. So somewhere in the middle of my experiments with truth, Gandhi writes, and I quote, I understand more clearly today what I had read long ago about the inadequacy of autobiography as history. I know that I do not set down in this story all that I remember. Who can say how much I must give and how much I must omit in the interest of truth? If some busybody were to cross-examine me on the chapters already written, because the chapters were being serialized in his magazine, if some busybody were to cross-examine me on the chapters already written, he could probably shed much more light on them. And if it were a hostile critic's cross-examination, he might even flatter himself for having shown up the hollowness of many of my pretensions. So Gandhi is up front. These are my experiments with truth. Right? This is not the truth. Incidentally, Usha-ben is here. My friend Gopal Gandhi, whom Usha-ben knows, and whom, like Usha-ben is a native Gujarati speaker, as will be some other people in this room, tells me that a more accurate translation of the Gujarati is not my experiments with truth, but truth's experiments with me. All right? That's abhorrent. All right. Now, so while Gandhi knew this and was aware of it, most people are not, all these, you'll see now there's kind of a epidemic of celebrity autobiographies, from all kinds of people, politicians, technocrats, scientists, socialites, and each one of them is either an exercise in vanity or a preemptive strike against a future biographer, or both. And if you're really interesting and important enough, you'll get a book written about you that is better than your autobiography. And it's very rare. Maybe, there's Rousseau back in the 18th century or something. You can think of, you won't get a better book than that. So, I've called this talk The Craft of Historical Biography. And I now want to turn to that aspect, which Usha Ben also mentioned. That dialectic between the individual and his times. If you choose the right person to write about, to biographize, if you choose the right person to biographize, you can illuminate not only the recesses of her or his life, but many other larger, more fundamental aspects of social, cultural, and political history. You take my first biographical subject, very relevant, who was what I call a figure of the middle range. He was not someone from a working class or peasant background, but he wasn't hugely famous like the other people I mentioned, like Churchill or de Gaulle or Gandhi or whatever. He was somewhere like in the range of Durga Bhagwat. I might come back to this if I have time. An interesting figure who interacted with the top and with the bottom. Now, if a life of Verrier Elwin is not only a life of that man who lived from 1902 to 1964, and the books he wrote and the marriages he had and which broke up and the relationships he was fortunate to have, the friendships he made, the enemies he made and so on, it also illuminates, a life of Elwin also illuminates some much larger historical processes. First of all, it illuminates the complex, contradictory, and many-faceted encounter between India and England, of which, of course, the Asiatic Society is one example, right? Here is a man who has 2 Oxford degrees, who could, if he had wanted, become a don at Oxford, or because one of his degrees was in theology, he was ordained in the church, become a bishop. But no, he comes here, he goes to Pune, joins a Christian ashram, meets Gandhi, leaves that, goes to Madhya Pradesh, and his whole life is a window into this relationship between India and Britain. It's also a window into the relationship between Eastern and Western religions. I mean, he was a trained theologist, and he wrote some wonderful works on looking at Indian traditions through the lens of a mystic Christian. So he wrote a book on medieval Christianity, dissenting tradition in medieval Christianity, and the first chapter is called The Bhakti Movement in 14th Century England. Right. So this is looking at those priests who use the vernacular, like the Bhakti priests, who disengaged themselves from the hierarchy of the priest and the church and sought a direct relationship with their deity. He wrote another fascinating little book, which is the title escapes me. It's a pamphlet. It was a lecture given in Bombay in 1930 at the time of the Salt March. It's essentially, I'll tell you what it's called. It's called Christ and Satyagraha. So it's a beautiful, it's a lecture given in Mumbai around the time of the Salt March, saying non-violent resistance to unjust state oppression is in the tradition of the Christ for ABCD reasons. I mean, he was a learned scholar of the Christian tradition. So Elwin's life tells you something about the relationship between Eastern and Western religions, between India and England, and most fundamentally, it illuminates the harsh, unforgiving, unequal encounter between Adivasis and the modern world. One of my chapters of my Elwin biography is called The Defender of the Aboriginal. We've had people like Ambedkar eloquently and effectively taking forward the rights of Dalits. But Adivasis did not at that stage have an articulate spokesperson of their own, who was Adivasi himself. And Elwin sort of was a self-appointed defender of the Adivasis. He wrote about how commercial forestry had dispossessed them of their natural resources. He wrote about how Hindu and Christian missionaries had treated their own folk traditions with contempt. He wrote about the impact of landlords in Adivasi society. One of the reasons he dissented with Gandhi, by the way, was because of the Gandhian credo of prohibition. Because, alcohol, particularly traditional alcohol, that is the brewing from mawa flowers and so on, was very much part of their symbols, their myth, their culture and so on. So Elvin's life is a window into many things. If you choose the life of Durga Bhagwat, a figure comparable to Elvin, in that she was not super famous nor obscure. Comparable to Elvin in that she wrote a hell of a lot. Comparable to Elvin in her courage, in her polemical zeal, in her ability to attract disciples and make enemies. All of that. Right. So if you want to write about Durga, somebody here was to write not just Durga Bhagwat, since I speak in Mumbai, people of that category, whom I call figures of the middle range. Acharya Atre would be another. Vijay Tendulkar would be a third. You could tell the whole history of modern Maharashtra, through their lives, their struggles, their romances, their disputes, their controversies, and so on and so forth. So, it's very, very, that's why the relative poverty of a tradition of historical biography is to be deplored, because it's a loss to literature in that readers like to read. Biography is a best-selling genre in England and France and America for a reason. All of us like to read interesting lives of other people. It's a loss to literature, but it's also a loss to history, because a well-crafted, well-researched, carefully argued life of an interesting and significant individual can tell you a great deal about social change as well. So it's a pity that historical biography is an underdeveloped area in India, particularly because modern India has produced such a wide range of fascinating characters who await their biographers. And I'm going to give you just a few examples of the kinds of lives I would like to see written. And I'm sure many of you would like to see written. Lives of remarkable political figures at the level of the states. Each of our major states is the size of a large European country. How many people does Maharashtra have? 60 million? Does anyone care? Huh? 80 to 90 million, right. So Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, these are all the size of a European country. So think of a history of France. If you write a history of post-war France, you'd probably have at least 10, maybe 20 well-researched lives of de Gaulle. At least 5 of Pierre Mendès France, at least 3 of Mitterrand, and so on and so forth, right? I don't think there's a single life, a well-researched, non-hagiographical life of Y.V. Chavan. And please correct me, if anyone can correct me, please tell me, correct me now. Likewise, Morarji Desai. Likewise, E.M.S. Namboodiripad, extraordinary figure. All of these are remarkable people. How can you think of the history of modern Kerala without E.M.S. Namboodiripad? Sheikh Abdullah. Slowly they are getting written. I was heartened to see recently that a very distinguished historian of the Punjab, J.S. Garewal, has written a book on Master Tara Singh. So, interesting political figures below the level of Indira Gandhi and Vallabhbhai Patel. Because these are people who are regional only in the Indian context. But in absolute terms, they shape the lives for good or for ill of 50, 60, 80, 100 million people. Jyoti Basu, nothing. You'll find there was a worshipful life of Jyoti Basu, written while he was alive. And 6 months after that book appeared, the person who wrote the book became Pro-Vice Chancellor of Kolkata University. Okay. And the same would have happened if you'd been in Maharashtra and written a worshipful biography of Bal Thackeray if you were alive. So it's not left or right? It's generally par for the course, right? So I think that's the first kind of biography I'd like written, of interesting, remarkable political figures below the levels of the Boses and the Ambedkars and so on, and even at the level of the Boses and the Ambedkars and the Patels and the Nehrus. You need multiple biographies. Patel leads a new book. There's a very good book written by Rajmohan Gandhi, but that was in 1991. Hell of a long time ago. Every generation needs his new Patel. Every generation needs there is nothing that has succeeded Dhananjay Keer. And the first volume came out, I think, when Ambedkar was still alive, 1954, if I remember serves. Right? So, I think many more books on our remarkable political figures at the so-called national and the so-called regional level. Figures from the arts or from music. Think, for example, of what a properly researched, elegantly written life of the sitarist Ravi Shankar can tell us about India and the world. I mean, unbelievably interesting life. You know, from a Bengali Bhadradog family, started in Banaras, went to Paris, joined his brother, came back, became a chela of Ustad Alauddin Khan, was married to the daughter, abandoned the daughter, then took Indian music abroad, worked in films, influenced the Beatles. I mean, extraordinary life, right? He's written an autobiography called Ragamala, which is a preemptive strike, clearly, and a great deal more needs to be told. I mean, our first great cultural ambassador, and a very complex, interesting figure. You know, his rivalry with Vilayat Khan. You know, so many things that come in when you write about someone like Ravi Shankar or Hussain, M.F. Hussain, similar kind of figure. So, in the arts, there would be other examples from theatre, you know, from music and so on. So, political figures, figures in the arts, including writers, you know, major writers, and a third category of people whom I think we need good books on are our influential, charismatic, and sometimes controversial business leaders. Last year, in July, I was asked to give a lecture in memory of J.R.D. Tata. It was only a lecture. It was not a whole book. And while doing research for that lecture, I realized how much there was to the man's life and work. Not how much there was, how much more there was than in the hagiographical books written about him. And the reason I can't write on J.R.D. Tata beyond a lecture is because you need to know business. And I don't know business. Right? I know enough business to give one lecture, but not to write a whole life. Right? I would do a rotten job about J.R.D.'s technological or business vision. But his life is utterly fascinating. You know, the letters he wrote, his ideas about all kinds of things, right? So, likewise, we await a good biography of Dhirubhai Ambani. I mean, what can Dhirubhai Ambani tell us about Mumbai, Maharashtra, and India? So, whether they be lives of politicians, musicians, writers, activists, business leaders, they all wait to be written. Historical biography has been an impoverished, underdeveloped field in India, but that is changing. The best days of historical biography lie ahead of us. I wrote in a column some time ago that I know at least 4 younger writers currently embarked on biographical projects. And each one of them, I know from their previous work, will write a good book. I did not identify them in print, and I'm not going to identify those 4 writers now because I don't want to put nazar on them. Right? But younger scholars, writers are taking this up. You'll see in the years and decades to come that this field will become more rich, well-populated, more nuanced than it has been so far. So while, as I have lamented in my lecture, and Usha Ben lamented before me, the art and craft of historical biography is underdeveloped in our country, in 20 years, this will not be the case. I'm going to end my talk with the person whose biography I would most like to have written. He's a person not very well known in this room, so I should introduce him. His name was Shivaram Karant, and he was, though I wouldn't dare say it in Kolkata, I can say it safely in Mumbai, he was the Kannada Tagore. He did as many things as Tagore, some as badly as Tagore. So he was a lousy filmmaker, he also pioneered Kannada film, but some as well as Tagore. Shivaram Karant was the first great modern Kannada novelist. He was a tireless fighter for women's emancipation. He pioneered widow remarriage in the Kannada country. He was one of our first important environmentalists. He wrote the first major environmental tracts in Kannada. And he did many, many other things besides. I've met him twice. I first met him in 1989 when he was leading a campaign to save the Western Ghats against the depredation of the mining, dam building and nuclear power lobbies. So I went to his home village Saligrama in Uttar Kannada district. This is 1989. So I was writing a newspaper article for the Illustrated Weekly on the Western Ghats movement. So I went to meet him. He was already in his mid-80s. And he was an incredibly charismatic figure. He was sort of like Einstein. White moustache, white hair. Unlike Einstein, he only wore white. So the white jubba, white kurta, white house. Right. And I went and met him and he talked about his love of nature, his love of life, why the Western Ghats were even more important to India's biodiversity than the Himalaya, and why at the age of 85 he had started a movement to save them. So I interviewed him, went to Delhi, where I then worked, as I've told you, in the Ministry of Economic Growth. And the next week I went to the Nehru Museum and Library to look at the microfilms of the Bombay Chronicle newspaper for 1936. Because in that year, 1936, I knew that Elwin, whose life I was then writing, Elwin had had the mother of all disputes with Gopal Sadashiv Ghuriye, G.S. Ghuriye, whose chalk is somewhere nearby. So I wanted to find out the details of this dispute, and I was looking at these old newspaper microfilms of 1936. Looking for Elwin, I came across the name of Shivaram Karan in the Bombay Chronicle. It said, Yakshagana troupe has its first performance in Bombay. So Yakshagana is the folk dance from a western coast, the west coast, which Karan had helped revive. So 53 years before I had talked to him about leading an environmental movement, this person had come to your city with the Yakshagana troupe. That was my first encounter, which, as you would say, I was gobsmacked. Right. Now this is 1989. Fast forward 5 years to 1994. In that year, I had gone to a town in the Carnatic plateau called Rani Bennur, which is on the Tungabhadra river, because an environmental group I was involved with in northern Karnataka had just won a Supreme Court verdict to stop pollution by a factory, a Birla factory of the Tungabhadra river. And they were having a celebration. Now, this group, called the Samaj Parivartan Samudaya, had filed a PIL in the Supreme Court against pollution, and a favorable verdict had come. And in those days, if you filed a PIL in the Supreme Court and you came from Karnataka, it was always Dr. Shivaram Karan against the Union of India. Now, it was called, this group fought the case, they won, and since I'd helped them peripherally, they said, come for the celebration. So I went to Rani Bennur. I took a train probably from Bangalore, not from Bombay. Got out at the station and someone came to meet me and we were driving to the venue. And the drive to the venue had these big banners which said, to celebrate SPS's victory in the Supreme Court and Dr. Karan's 90th birthday. So that was the first I knew that this was a double celebration. So we went to the hall where Dr. Karan spoke. He also put on his gungrus and danced for a bit, by the way, little bit, for about a few minutes. And he chatted and spoke. And afterwards, we repaired to the guest house, where all the invitees were having dinner. Now, I'm a historian. I'm interested in dates. I wanted to know, this is 1994. I forget the month, it may have been April or May. When exactly did Dr. Karan turn 90? So I didn't dare ask the great man himself. So before dinner, I went outside and talked to his driver. He had come up the ghats in an ambassador car. And the ambassador car was also white. I don't remember whether the driver's uniform was white, but the car was white. So I caught hold of this gentleman and I said, sir, tell me, when did Dr. Karan turn 90? Is it today, tomorrow, last week, next week? When exactly is his 90th birthday? He said, sir, actually it's 91 and a half. I said, what do you mean? He says, for the last year, I've been taking him in this car all around the state. In Tumkur, it is inauguration of Women's Science College in Dr. Karan's 90th birthday. In Gulbarga, it is Karnataka Sahitya Sammelana and Dr. Karan's 90th birthday. In Bangalore, it is whatever, Human Rights Day and Dr. Karan's 90th birthday. So the last year, I've just been taking him around. So here is a person. Now, this is a lovely, funny story. It's completely true, by the way. I have embroidered it only a bit, not very much. You can remember, I haven't given the driver a white uniform yet, right? I might do so next time. Now, here is a man who is so venerated by his state that every district wants an excuse to celebrate his 90th birthday. Now, he was the greatest Indian I ever met. His bust is on my writing table as I speak. Always, it's there. My computer, Dr. Karan. Above that is a something else, but Dr. Karan is there on my bust. A bust of him is there on my desk. He was the greatest Indian I had the privilege of meeting. But there were others as remarkable, Durga Bhagwat for another. And I do hope I live long enough to see the lives written of Shivaram Karang, Durga Bhagwat, and many other such remarkable Indians. Thank you very much.
Dr. Guha has agreed to take a few questions, as long as they are questions and not comments on this.
Yeah.
Writing historical biographies, how much freedom should author take?
Yeah, okay. A very good question. Yeah.
Another, while writing,
Huh?
that, how much freedom should
Author take. Yeah.
and another, how much research should he do?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Third,
Yeah. Those two are already very important, but go ahead. Yeah.
and how much literature support should he take?
So, how much research or biography should do? As much as necessary. Don't rush it. So, one of these young people who's writing a historical biography came to consult me in Bangalore last month. And this person is writing a life of a very unusual, remarkable man. India's first great engineer, M. Visvesvaraya. Many of you would know the name, right? So I told him, the young boy, I said, don't rush it. So I signed a contract with my publisher 1 year. I said, tear up that contract. So the first answer to the question is, let it evolve, because you don't know where the sources will be. No, where you'll find some papers, and so you have to give it several years. Now, how much, what liberties, what was your first question? How much? Freedom. So, you see, in theory, as much freedom as is necessary. But in practice, you live in India. Right. So, I write on Gandhi, I'm totally free, because there is no one to defend Gandhi. Gandhi belongs to everybody. If I was writing about Ambedkar or Savarkar or Subhash Bose, there would be problems. So there is a practical issue. But from the biographer's point of view, you must not suppress anything, however inconvenient it may be, unless it directly affects, unless it is insignificant and it affects a living person. So in my book on Elwin, I suppressed one insignificant fact. Two, that now it's out in the open, but that was 20 years ago. In my second edition, I even put that in. Namely, two of Elwin's children who were then living may not have been Elwin's children. And it was that kind of inconsequential, and I was not even sure I didn't know for certain whose children they were. He adopted them, but whether they were biologically his children, I was not sure. So my answer to the question would be, don't suppress. I mean, the autobiographer can suppress. You want to tell your story, suppress as much as you want. As Gandhi said, give what you want, don't give what you want. But of course, full freedom is constrained by the political climate of intolerance we live in. That is the objective fact. Yeah. Richard, go ahead. Yeah.
At the 23rd of March, I feel I need to ask.
Why do you wait for that? Yeah.
As it's the 23rd of March, I feel I need to ask a question about Shahid Bhagat Singh. And my question is, he's somebody that we never studied in history books when we studied Indian history at school or at university. And yes, he's somebody who we know almost entirely through his pictorial representation. And I was wondering if you would say anything about when you were doing your biography for use of non-written sources for research.
So, absolutely. I mean, the question was about Bhagat Singh, who lived a very short life and did not leave a very rich or detailed trail of written materials. And through pictorial, of course, that would be true. Even now, you could write a book on Gandhi through cartoons and illustrations and calendars and so on. But so absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I know even less about art than I know about business. So I'm the wrong person to ask that question. But I'll say one thing about your link to further your question. A very interesting and developing sphere of biographical writing is to write on the afterlives of a phenomenon. You know, the afterlives of Ambedkar would be fascinating. Here is a person who till the 1960s is virtually unknown outside Maharashtra. And even in Maharashtra, not a major figure. You know, even in Maharashtra. Here is Eleanor Zelliot, who's the great pioneering scholar of Dalit studies, writes a dissertation in 1965 based on many Marathi sources. She can't get a mainstream publisher. But now no one would have a problem. So the afterlife of Ambedkar, the afterlife of Bhagat Singh, the life and afterlife of Gandhi. You know, Gandhi has gone from being the father of the nation to the person you either evoke on October 2nd, if you're Prime Minister, of any party, that's it, or you recklessly attack. So the afterlives, I mean, it's a very interesting field, and I think Bhagat Singh, Ambedkar, Gandhi would write afterlives of all these people. Yeah, Ram. Wait for the mic.
About 10 years ago, I had asked you about biography on Sharad Pawar and Mayawati, and you had said that you can never write one because they left no written records. Do you still stand by that?
No, I don't. I'll modify that. That's good. I'll modify that because maybe because of my own experience, I'll modify that. And it's a further for the last question. I perhaps have overvalued the importance of written records. The oral histories, interviews, now of course there's the email train, the illustrations. But you certainly must wait till they die. Because either you'll be too respectful, or if you're disrespectful, you'll get beaten up by their followers. Right. So I think both Sharad Pawar and Mayawati are fascinating characters. And they will one day get the biographies they deserve. But you have to see the whole life in the run. You can't write about a living person. By the way, anyway, I have been asked off and on to write, I think you don't mind my being a little even more facetious than I've been so far? Okay. We're talking about, see, I have got various offers to write biographies, right, which I've rejected. So when I wrote my book on Gandhi, or on Elvin in 1999, and it got a lot of good reviews and everyone wrote about it, I got a call from someone connected to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, whom I knew very slightly. And he said, Dr. Guha, you've written this good. You write about Atalji. BJP was in power. Oxford University Press will publish it. Every library will buy it. You are a good scholar. You write. I said, so I wanted to say no in a polite way. So I said, देखिए सर, कौल साहब, वो एल्विन तो छोटे-मोटे पादरी थे. प्रधानमंत्री की जीवनी मैं कैसे लिखूंगा? Right. Okay. So that was the first commission. Then I got commissions from various cricketers still living. And the most recent commission came when the UPA was in power. And I have objective records, so if anyone sues me for libel, I'll show you my email trail. I was approached on behalf of Gautam Bhai Adani to write his life. May he live a long life, even more prosperous life than so far. So in 2012, someone wrote to me. And of course I said no, saying, we've heard you're a good biographer and you've written India after Gandhi and all that. And Sri Gautam Adani wants you to write his life. And if you want, come here, and we'll talk about it. And of course you'll be properly compensated and so on. So I of course said no. And then I sent it to a couple of friends for their comments, that email. And one friend said, you should have accepted. Because one day, you could have written your own autobiography, which would have been called Adani After Gandhi, A Biographer's Journey. All right. Now, so do not write about living people. That would be my answer. Yes, right. Yeah. Good.
Hello. I'm audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Today the history is circulated through social media, and people read it and create a violence, in just Maharashtra experience last 2-3 lakh.
Correct.
It's like Bhima Koregaon, it happens about Ambedkar, Shivaji, and
Correct.
every.
Yeah.
So how do you see the future prospectus? Because the government is also modifying it through curriculum and it happens everywhere. So,
No, yeah, so, I mean, in a sense, I've answered this question, that we live in times which are fragile, uncertain, prone to controversy, people wanting attention, breaking the law, and social media contributes to this. But I want to restrict myself to the craft of biographical writing, and I would say, just as you have to use visual materials, emails, social media, anyone writing a biography of Narendra Modi, who may also live a very long and prosperous life, but wherever that life ends, you would have to look at his tweets. And likewise with Mr. Bachchan, who has, I think, numbers his tweets, T4312. So you would have to write about what Mr. Bachchan tweeted about and what he did not tweet about, So, you could see Mr. Bachchan's tweet as his collected autobiography with all the silences. Yeah. So, in a sense, social media will certainly be a resource for a future biography. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Significant.
I'll come in. Yeah.
It is significant that you mentioned artists, musicians, social workers, and so on and so forth, but you never mentioned a scientist.
No, that was purely inadvertent. That's a very good question, and I would, by the way, what are the living people who wanted me to write his life is a living scientist. India's most famous living scientist. You can judge who he is, right? All right. So, but dead scientists certainly, and not hagiographies. Why a really good, frank biography of C.V. Raman would tell you a great deal. Or Meghna Saha, or Baba. Absolutely. I would say in the rank of Indian scientists, dead scientists, not living, who deserve really good biographies would be J.C. Bose. Long time since anyone wrote on him, Raman, Bhabha, and possibly Meghnad Saha. Satyajit Bose was an unusual person but left very few traces, so it'd be hard to write. P.C. Mahalanobis, if you count him as a son. Absolutely, I would agree with you. I would love to read good books on any of them, not hagiographies. I agree. Yeah. I think that's it. Behind you. Yeah. You want to wait for the mic? I think we should take just last two questions. Yeah. You go ahead. You wait for the mic. Is the mic coming? Oh, sorry, I'll come to you. Last thing. Sorry, I'll come to you next.
Dr. Guha, you mentioned in the beginning that we are poor keepers of historical records.
Yes.
Now, the recording of contemporary history, it will be too much of a burden for one historian or a group of historians to undertake.
Yeah.
What is your view on the departments of history in universities and other academic institutions? Are they really doing a job of archiving or keeping historical records?
So that's a very good question. I think it's very important. So far, the job of archiving has been left to the government by and large, and it's too important to be left only to the government. And the government must do a good job of keeping government records. They are not. But private archives, for example, in this city, we have a business archive with Godrej, etc. Ashoka University in Delhi, it's a private university, is setting up a good archive of contemporary history. So we have to encourage much more of that. Science was mentioned. The Indian Institute of Science, which is our leading science institute in my hometown, for many years neglected its archive, but under a very fine, historically minded director, Professor P. Balram, they organized the records. So all our institutions must also collaborate in this, and it cannot be left purely to the government, because you know how government institutions run. They are unprofessionalized. It should not be an IAS officer running a state archive, but a competent archivist, with empowered powers. But that doesn't happen. Yeah.
When you
write a historical biography, how important is it or necessary is it to belong to the same culture, share the same values, religious ideas? I'm talking of Romain Rolland when he wrote about Gandhi.
Yeah.
In his journal, he keeps on saying, belonging to another nation, to another culture, do I have a right to say anything about Gandhi? And till the end, he wondered if he had not gone wrong.
Yeah, so I think, again, you need, for a figure like Gandhi, you need insiders and outsiders, both, you know. For most of our major figures, I mean, Tagore is too important to be left to the Bengalis. I've said it before, I'll say it again, right? Because he's a colossal, and Ravi Shankar said it well before me. Ravi Shankar, writing in the 670s, said, we Bengalis have kept Tagore so close to us, we haven't let the world know of his genius, they haven't even let the rest of India know of his genius. So you need both inside and outside. Clearly there's some things, there are nuances only a Bengali would capture. But you know, someone can I mean, Ambedkar is too important to be left to the Dalits, absolutely. Dalits can provide deep personal insights, which I can't provide, you can't provide. But someone who comes from outside may have a fresh view. So I think it's important to have both, not one. If a person is important enough, clearly, to write about Shivaram Karant, you have to be a Kannadiga. To write about Durga Bhagwat, you have to be a Maharashtrian, or someone totally fluent, or at least as fluent in Marathi as Eleanor Elliot, or Anne Feldhaus, a really good scholar of Maharashtra, right? But for someone else, you know, for a larger figure, I think you need both inside and outside. Yeah. I think one last question we should take.
My question is in general about autobiographies or biographies. So there are mentions of so many names and characters, as you said, in the biography. So that is with the perspective of a biographer or autobiographer who is writing. So what should it could be wrong in the view of that particular person. But in that case, what should be the stand of the biographer? Thus, there are so many instances and names mentioned in that, in the biography. So that is written in the perspective of an author who is writing that. So it could be an injustice on that particular person.
You know, I don't think we should be too touchy about it, you know, because I think it is said, especially because you write based on deep research, based on your knowledge, imperfect as it is, and if it is totally biased, someone will come and correct you. Someone will write, and if the subject is important enough, if you write about, shall we say, Savarkar in a certain way, you know, and you are slanted in a certain way, somebody else will come and correct you. But I want to say something else about a kind of tangent from your question about names. You know, I said earlier in my talk, I compared a biographer to a novelist, right? And I think it's, you know, and your question allows me to say that because this, you know, sometimes you write a book that is, if you actually flesh out all the secondary and tertiary characters, there's so many names. How do you juggle? I mean, it's really skillful. If you write a book on Gandhi, there are at least 100 major and minor figures. So, you know, how do you, like Romain Rolland, Mira Ben, forget Nehru, Patel, Mahadev Desai, and the art lies in, you know, making sure each of these has their place, but the reader is continuously reminded of them, you know, so it's really a very, I mean, it's a very hard and exciting, you know, and difficult journey. In that, it's like, that's why I call it a craft. It's not an art, it's not a science, it's really a craft.
I think Dr. Guha's lecture delivered in such a lucid way has been so stimulating. There have already been so many questions, and I'm sure there are many, but because of lack of time we can't take. And his observations have certainly enriched our understanding of historical biography. And you know, he has dealt with so many aspects of historical biography. I don't want to comment on them because that would spoil the impact he has already created, and I'm no match. But I would certainly like to tell that, you know, Dr. Guha, the pursuit of your academic pursuit has been so interesting and impressive, because you know how a person grows and how a person comes near to the subject matter and the surroundings. It's really remarkable. And the way you described your writing about Warrior Elvin, it's very fascinating, you know, how there are themes and sub-themes and threads, and you could weave them all together so well. And I've just two very brief comments. You know, first is that we have learned, especially from him, that historical biography goes beyond a depiction of life or just a beaten path of chronicles. Now, ultimately, it is to be felt also. It's not just information. So as a scholar says, it is more of a felt knowledge. And it's a valuable way to analyze and even humanize the past, and by bringing the insights from fiction writing and non-fiction writing. And secondly, I would like to say that, you know, biography is like life. Baffling and puzzling, astonishing and amazing, full of drama and disappointment, deviations and paradoxes, and as Dr. Guha rightly said and brought it out so clearly, that full of unexpected twists and turns. You don't know what's awaiting for you and how you would take it and what would be the dialectical interaction. And so Dr. Guha has handled the subject with such great care, precision, and sensitivity. And he has shown that even the most interesting person's life can be made incredibly boring unless written with creativity, skill, and passion. Passion is so important, and coupled with passion, there should be unquenchable desire to probe into the subject and his or her surroundings. Now, lastly, I would like to say, you know, we all read historical biographies. Of course, you write, we all read. And we read historical biographies of our heroes, heroines, important persons, sometimes, you know, not so important persons, because we want to know about their lives, their explorations, their successes, and their failures. And we read them also because we want to be informed. We want to be inspired. At times, we want to identify with them. And at times, we may even like to live somebody else's life for some moments. And that is why, Dr. Guha, we all read your books and will continue reading them. And thank you, Dr. Guha. Thank you, Asiatic, once again for inviting me. Thanks, Meena, for your kind words, and Wispy also. Thank you, Mr. Kale, and thanks for the audience. It has been very good.
We have to end the evening because all good things do come to an end, and just a few words that need to be said as a final vote of thanks. I have to begin by thanking the presence of the Bhagwat family here today, because this is a really important endowment lecture for us. So thank you for representing the Bhagwat family and for being here. I'm sure wherever she is, Durga Bhagwat will be delighted at the talk that was given today. I'm sure this is a wonderful way to bring to a conclusion the current session of endowment lectures. And I think I would be quite accurate in saying that we've ended this session of endowment lectures with a bang, certainly not with a whimper. I hope you'll forgive me if I first thank Dr. Usha Thakkar, since she began, and of course she gave a very fine rounding off to your remarkable presentation. I think it was so appropriate that, as usual, it's all credit goes to Chairperson Dr. Meena Vaishampayan, to have you as being in the chair for this evening, a Gandhian, very, very appropriate. And you began by drawing attention to this significant endeavor of writing historical biographies. And you did in the beginning say that all history is a combination of history and life. But initially I heard it as lie, history and lie. And I wondered whether that was closer to the truth. But of course, that's just a light-hearted remark. Thank you, Usha, for all that you have said and for always being so very much a part of the Asiatic Society. Dr. Guha, I really don't think I need to say how wonderful this session has been. You can see that the audience was absolutely enthralled. You could see that everybody was all eager to hear every single word you were saying. And I thought it was so well presented, the fact that you spoke about biography as a craft and how you got into, as Usha pointed out, your fortuitous encounter with Derya Elvin and how one discovers these things and gets caught up in them. I thought your 3 Boyle's laws of biography was delightful. It shows how marvelously inventive you can be. And the coda you added, I think it's told us a great deal about how biographies should be written, could be written, can currently be done. I think you've thrown this challenge to the people here because you've opened, I think, many windows. And I get the feeling that many are here waiting to move on, to maybe get started. You gave several ideas, and I'm not going to ask people to put up their hands, but I'm sure people are itching to get started. So wonderful to hear from you. Wonderful to have you here. I think it's an honor to the Asiatic Society that you agreed to be here today for the Dr. Durga Bhagwat lecture. I need to thank also one of our very active members who has recently got involved with the Asiatic, Smruti Kopikar, for you helped in arranging this lecture. Many, many thanks to you for doing that. I wish to also tell everybody that this particular endowment lecture was made possible because, of course, we all knew about Durga Bhagwat. We all respected her as a member. She spent many, many hours and days making use of the library. But after her passing, it was many of her admirers who got together to set up this endowment lecture. So we have to thank all those donors who, because of their enthusiasm and because of their donation, we were able to set up an endowment fund so that we can have people like Dr. Ramachandra Guha addressing us. So many thanks to the donors. And as usual, I have to thank Dr. Meena Vaishampayan for always getting us wonderful speakers and making evenings like this possible. Finally, thank you, the audience, for being here. I'm sure it was a marvelous evening for all of you. Good night.